I got a question from Tabby Cat in the chat room, and she wanted to know: do you think there is anything to the rumors that the Philadelphia Project has its roots in alien technology?
Mm. That goes back to the stories coming from Philip Corso,
Right.
who's a colonel. And I remember hearing his story years ago on the old Art Bell show, which was a great show. He talked about, and I ended up going out and buying his book. And I'm one of those people in there, Henry, that when I do that stuff, I buy the book, I start reading it. A number of times I've been known to make notes in the margins. Things I find that look good, things I find that make you scratch your head. And when I hear his story about how he was involved, he was at Roswell. He reportedly saw one of the bodies at Roswell, saw like the baby coffins before they were shipped out. That was his first taste of this whole thing. And then being appointed later on to basically review files in a room where there are all these file cabinets, all this information was in there. And he was asked to, read it over and say, okay, what would we do with all this stuff? And once he started reading it over, it was all about these crashes, objects being recovered, and so forth. And the question was, what do we do with all this stuff we recovered? And his thought was, we basically don't give it to one person. You do the thing the government does, is you basically spread it apart so it's all over the place. Like when the Manhattan Project was done, they were building the atomic bomb. You had only a couple people really knew everything about that was going on about the bomb. It was all compartmentalized. So you had one group working on this, another group working on this, and they really didn't have communication between each other on what the whole project was, only their little piece. Well, his thoughts were along that same line, where you basically compartmentalize it and you give it to companies of various specialties, and you let them attempt to reverse engineer what they were finding. Now, when I hear that thought, I'm like, that makes perfect sense to me. You give it out, you divvy it up, and you let these companies reverse engineer it, so that way if somebody's working on one portion, they don't know what this whole thing is all about, only what they're working on. But when I look at his story, though, I remember right, he was the person who called him in charge of the project. I think it was like a colonel. And one of the things that came up is, would a colonel be the person really be in charge of this whole thing? Or actually, he was a colonel. Wouldn't you put somebody maybe higher than that on this project? So I'm not 100% sold on Corso. I've got reservations about his story. Now, I'm not saying it didn't happen by any means, but I've just got some reservations on there. I think that, one, you can't underestimate people themselves on our intelligence. If you take today's technology and you basically reverse that process, that like every 2 years technology reportedly doubles. Well, if you go back and you take the other direction, go backwards with it, we may be about back to the vacuum tube in the 1940s. So it may be falling about right where it should be. Now, the thing is I wouldn't want to give credit for everything out there, for example, being developed. Like, according to them, they said that you look at things like Kevlar, you look at certain other technologies we have today, like integrated circuits, things along those lines, that reportedly came from alien technologies. I think we've developed a good fair share of that percentage. But then again, there's other things that maybe there is some stuff going on out there. Like, if we go back to what Barbara brought up is the Nimitz case. If that object that's being seen in the Nimitz case if that object in the videos is not ours, or let's say it is ours, and it's flying of a technology that we don't know about, like in this case, the propulsion system, we don't see a heat signature like off of jet engines. We don't see wings. Is it maybe there's some truth to Corso's story that things were found, the things were reverse engineered, and now some of the things that we're seeing in those videos, maybe that's some stuff that has been reverse engineered based on that technology. It was, let's say, discovered in the 1940s. But
now,
that Corso story is a real interesting one, though.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a little bit, and that is, and it comes back to a lot of the alien shows that are on television, and the argument against them is they're presupposing that humans were not sufficiently intelligent enough to build pyramids, that it had to have alien tech intervention. Wouldn't you use the same argument today that we are sufficiently intelligent enough to make technological leaps? I know Elon Musk is one of the people that says, 40 years ago or 20 years ago, we were all playing Pong. And now, look at, we're now into 3D.
Oh, you're right.
Games.
And the things like Pong are now retro games.
Yeah.
But you're right. That's why I don't think you can underestimate the human intelligence of being able to develop some of these things. Because, like you say, I mean, you look at things like Pong, 40 years ago, that was the big thing. You go back and look at videotape when it first came out. You look at MP3 players, which, I mean, how long did those last? And now you look at what a modern cell phone can do technology-wise. It's got more power than what the computers did to go to the moon.
Yeah.
So you're right, Barbara. When I look at all those things, you don't want to sell the human intelligence short of being able to develop some of that stuff on our own. And as far as, like, you were going back to, like, the Ancient Aliens, some of those are my pet peeve shows. That you'd have to have a recorder running in the background when the show is on the air. And I just happen to be in the house and I watch some of these things. Sometimes my comments do get kind of very colorful, describing what I think about what they're presenting in the show, because there's some very good shows out there where they present some very good facts. There's other ones that I can't believe some of the crap coming out of their mouths.
Now, do you mean series or episodes within certain series?
Both.
Well, like some episodes of Ancient Aliens may be better than other episodes, or do you mean Ancient Aliens on its own is like bleh?
Well, let's just say per episode. That's the best way to go about it. Because I've seen some that some of the individuals they bring out there, some of the things that they're talking about, I'm thinking, are you freaking serious? All you're doing is misleading the public just to get on the show. And is it something that you really believe yourself, or is this something they told you to say?
Sounds like you're describing politics.
Yeah, and it's like, are you that desperate for a paycheck?
Well, everyone's pretty much that.
Yeah, it really upsets me on some of the shows when they do that.
Well, the other day, we sometimes have it on in the break room at the museum, and I'll be sitting there, and they'll have Giovanni or whatever go to this out in the middle of nowhere area, and they'll have what used to be some huge structure or even a city that's been long since abandoned, and they figured out that these buildings, they'd bring engineers and architects out there saying, how do you think this was made? And they're like, you couldn't do this without cranes. But when they were made, they didn't have cranes. And it wouldn't have been, scaffolding wouldn't have made it because the stones were too large and they were from too far away.
Right. And those are interesting points. But then again, I saw one of the shows the one day where they're talking about erecting some of the monoliths. Mm-hmm. And they did it with wind power. And what they did is they basically made something almost like a kite. The problem is they were using hemp ropes, which aren't as strong as modern day nylon materials. But they proved that they were able to take wind power and basically stand a couple ton monolith up.
Whoa.
They took and kind of like dug a hole at one end of the monolith, and they said the one thing that's pretty much a constant in the desert is wind. And you really, and it's just thinking outside the box in a very unique way. That they didn't overcome the rope strength, but they proved that the things could be moved by wind.
So that's a new one on me. I always thought it was like pulleys and such like that. And yeah, they had the hole dug, and all they could get, as long as they could get it upright, it would settle into the hole.
Right. And you look at some of the ones that they stood up, and that would be one way of potentially standing them up. Now, it's not dragging a stone all the way up the side of a pyramid by any means.
Right.
But it shows that if you think outside the box, what you can potentially do. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it made you really wonder, like, maybe they did do something. I look at something like Coral Castle down in Florida. Here's all these mammoth stones that were put up by an individual that all done by himself. And how did he do those? Did he have some unique way that we never thought about on doing it? Because, again, they didn't find tons of pulleys and everything else. Because on some of the big stones, he actually moved his castle from one location to another one. And they said that there would be a truck there, and he'd load the truck overnight, and they would drive the truck to a new location. He would load things overnight. And they didn't know how he was doing it. Again, these huge, heavy stones. And just getting them balanced for doorways. So you could use one hand and open this door up that was made out of this stone. And there's been the rumor for years that, okay, maybe he had alien intelligence helping him, or he had some way of manipulating him with some unknown power. But there's things that have gone on for years that just make you scratch your head. And
sure.
Some of them, though, on the other hand, if you sit back and look, we say, wait, maybe somebody did have some unique way of doing these without alien help.
Well, I mean, if you look at people like Leonardo da Vinci coming up with airplanes long before they were even possible, and you get people like Einstein, and it makes you kind of wonder, aliens must have their own creative geniuses as well.
Exactly. I mean, you look at Einstein and the things that they're now still coming out saying, okay, they proved that Einstein was right on this. How many years later?
Right.
100 years later?
Before Einstein could prove it. Yeah.
Right, before he could, 100 years later. And they're proving things.
So, yeah, it's always possible that, well, I mean, when you think about it, that the laws of physics probably apply everywhere in the universe, and that certain very intelligent people are going to be able to figure out those laws.
That's right.
Up with it.
Exactly. And that's why when we look at times things, recovered artifacts from potential craft, is it you're really looking at something, a unique metal, or is it just a normal metal that's has unique properties? And I tend to believe that, anything that's going to be recovered is going to be a typical material we're familiar with, basically a familiar material we're familiar with, but it's going to have very, very unique properties associated with it. Mm-hmm. It goes back to almost like going back to Jeffrey with Star Trek. Transparent aluminum.
Or aluminum, yeah.
Yeah.
Aluminum you can see through. And they actually do have aluminum you can see through that's kind of like layered almost like glass.
Wow.
Hey, they have working tricorders now, Thomas, and I want one.
Working tricorders.